Join us for Book Beat, Sundays at 5 p.m., repeated Monday at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. on Channel 20. Our guest is Glenn Ickler, author of Murder on the St. Croix. See you then. I'm trying something new today. I've got my questions on my phone. Good afternoon and welcome to Book Beat. Reading books is the key to an enlightened society. You want a key light back there, right?
Just gonna borrow this.
I think we're about ready, aren't we, Jesse? Good. Book Beat is a show about books and book readers.
A very odd combination of topics.
We interview book club members. How are your books chosen? And film their discussions.
Trying to find happiness and love in her life.
We also provide tips for forming book clubs
I think you just have to find a group of interested book readers.
and books that are current that might be enjoyable to read. In a society where everything is instantaneous, we're losing that sense of depth that reading can bring that other media doesn't. My name is Sue Ellen Zagrabelny.
Well, I can't guarantee Oprah, but I can guarantee Channel 20.
Look for Book Beat, Sundays at 5 p.m., repeated Monday at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. on Channel 20. See you then. Hello and welcome to Book Beat. Today our guest is Glenn Ickler, author of Murder on the St. Croix, a Mitch Mitchell mystery. Glenn, welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born on a Friday the 13th in a little two-bedroom house in Woodbury, and I was so perfect that my parents never had any other children. And we had 10 acres. I grew up in a rural setting. We could see one neighbor to the north and one to the south. And we had a 10-acre place with about half of it was apple orchard. And my dad worked nights for the Great Northern Railroad, and we grew apples and berries and a bunch of chickens and things like that. So I grew up sort of half farming and going to a one-room school 2 miles away for the first eight grades.
Right. So you grew up in the Woodbury area.
Yes.
So,
In fact, it was the oldest house in Woodbury.
oh, really?
Yes.
And so, where did you get your schooling? Where did you go to school, to high school and college?
For high school, I went to St. Paul Park, which was much, much smaller than it is now. I mean, now they have 3 high schools in the district where we had 1, and I had 51 people in my graduating class, whereas they have hundreds now. And from there, I went to Hamlin University and got my bachelor's degree at Hamlin.
Okay. And what was your background as far as academic background? What did you decide to major in?
I majored in theater and in English. And so I was acting and writing all the way through college.
Okay, thank you.
I was sports editor of the Oracle, the newspaper, and I was the editor of the literary magazine. So
You really got your start and cut your teeth early in
yes.
the campus
Yeah.
publications.
Right.
Tell us a little bit to start out about Murder on the St. Croix. We've got some questions from our studio audience, but just give us a little flavor of.
Well, my main characters, I worked for newspapers for 40 years, So my main characters in all my books are a newspaper reporter and photographer. And they tend to get overly involved in the crimes that they're investigating. And sometimes it leads them into a lot of trouble. This particular book, it starts out with an ice storm in which one of the workmen repairing things after the ice storm disappears. And they find it takes place next to the St. Croix River. And they find his body downstream a little ways a couple days later. And the sheriff would like to blow it off as an accident, but there are certain signs that make it look like it might not be an accident. And Mitch Mitchell, who is the reporter, kind of pushes them into investigating that as such, and things develop from there.
Okay, okay. We're going to go to our audience now and hear some questions that they have. Our audience is made up of members of the Maple Grove Library Mystery Book Club and Fiction Book Club. And first of all, I'd like to call on Maria.
Miss Glenn, I was wondering what led you early in your career, what early experiences you had in your career, or what special events led you to decide to write a mystery fiction novel?
Did you get that?
You want to run that past me again?
Sure.
Hear that.
What in your life led you to write mystery novels?
Oh, well, I guess I started writing in grade school. My Auntie Ruth claimed I started writing with color crayons on her walls when I was 3, but that's an exaggeration, I'm sure. But anyway, I started writing little short stories and things in grade school, and in high school I wrote for the student paper in high school. A friend and I wrote a humor column that we called the Peculiar Press, in which we slandered a lot of people, but even the teachers liked it. So then in college I continued to write, and then I went into newspapers and wrote, and I always, I read a lot of different books in different genres, and I liked mysteries. And so when it came time to start trying to write novels, I decided to try the mystery genre. It actually didn't start with the two, well, it started with the two characters, but in a different way, and then I eventually, after a couple of rejection slips, changed the whole thing around and got into it that way.
Could you talk a little bit about your work life, since you brought it up that you wrote for a newspaper? What could you tell us about that?
Well, my work life started in Winona as farm editor.
Okay.
I was the only one on the staff who could tell a difference between a plow and a seeder, I guess. But anyway, I was there that was my first newspaper job after I got out of 4 years of Navy in between college and starting my career. From there, I went to the St. Paul Dispatch as a general assignment reporter, which is basically what my main character in these novels are. And after a few years of that, I left the paper for a year, went to the University of Minnesota as the staff writing there, the public relations department. Mm-hmm. And then I got a call from the editorial page editor. They had a job on the editorial page back at St. Paul Dispatch that they would like me to fill, so I went back there, and I did that for about 15 years, and I was associate editor of the editorial page, where I wrote a column every Sunday and wrote editorials, and when my boss was away, I was the editorial page editor. Mm-hmm. And then he retired, and they brought in a new editorial page editor, who, in a word, I detested.
Okay.
And he didn't like me either.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah. So he had this thing about the editorial page shouldn't offend anybody, and which was absolutely the opposite of what we'd been doing for 17 years. So eventually I left there and went out to, along with several other people, and I went out to Massachusetts and got a job as the editorial page editor in a suburban daily near Boston, just west of Boston, where we covered 31 towns. And then when the economy went down again in the late 80s, they cut the staff there, and I wound up as the editor of a daily out in central Massachusetts, or a weekly, I'm sorry, out in central Massachusetts, and that was the last newspaper job I had.
Were you writing your mysteries all the time?
I didn't start writing my mysteries until I retired from newspapers. I tried in the 70s or 60s actually to do a novel while I was working in the paper, and it just never came off. It just took too much time. I would never see my kids if I didn't. I mean,
Okay.
I worked with a guy named John Camp, who is now known as John Sanford,
Okay.
who is now a millionaire because he would get up at 5 in the morning and write, come to work for 8 hours, go home and write some more. And he did that until his wife divorced him. But he's now a millionaire and his wife came back. But
Funny
I had
thing,
4 kids to raise, and I didn't choose to live that way. But when I retired, that was the first thing I started to do when I retired.
Okay, okay. Let's go back to the audience for a moment. And Barb, you have a question.
Yes. What was your inspiration for this book? Is it based on a real life event?
Well, it's sort of. We had a big ice storm out where I live now, with a lot of branches and trees down and a huge repair job. Crews came out from the Midwest even to help clean up the mess. And I thought, now, this would be, a good time for someone to disappear if somebody didn't like him. And then I had to figure out where to put it. And I lived in St. Mary's Point, which is where this book starts. Right down the first setting is right where we lived in St. Mary's Point, right down the hill, the river, St. Croix River. And so I had the guy disappear there. And we also, after that, we lived in Afton, and we were good friends of the people who ran Windmill Bill Marina. So I thought that'd be a good place to have the body hang up and be found. And so that's how that book came about.
Okay. Are the settings for all of your Mitch Mitchell books in the general area of the St. Croix and Stillwater and so forth, or do they go a little further afield?
They go further. Well, yeah. One of them is at the St. Paul Winter Carnival.
Okay.
And that pretty much stays in St. Paul. Another is at the State Fair.
Mm-hmm.
Then the one that just came out this month takes place on Gull Lake up in Brainerd.
Uh-huh.
So, but they're all most of them are Minnesota bound. I work with a Minnesota publisher, St. Cloud Press, and they are Minnesota oriented. They want you to write about Minnesota.
Okay.
Before that, I had a different publisher, and so I did a couple of Massachusetts people stories.
Mm-hmm.
But
And it's North Star Press, is that right?
yes, that's right.
Okay. Our next question from the audience is Bernadine.
In your books, Mitch and Al have some interesting and unusual and humorous dialogue. They use play on words and pop culture references that both of them seem to get right away. But it's the kind of dialogue that I haven't seen very often in books. What's your inspiration for that? Do you know people that actually do that sort of banter back and forth, or is it your writer's imagination?
Well, I wanted to make the books entertaining. And also I got some advice from another person who worked with me on the editorial page at the Dispatch, who Carol Nelson Douglas is her name, and she moved to Texas and started writing a series that she's made a good living at. I talked to her about my writing, and she said, well, the thing you do best is humor, so you ought to try to work humor in there. So and I've always been a punster, unfortunately. And I have a couple of friends who we can carry on for quite a long time with exchanging puns back and forth. And so I find it fun to write that way, and I have a lot of readers who seem to enjoy that, so I just keep on doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. There was a question from the audience. Was the plot based on a real-life crime?
Yeah. No, it wasn't. Well, none of. Well, I take that the very first book.
And the name of that is?
And the name of that is One Death Too Many.
Okay.
Was based on a real crime. Only I changed the killer. Mm-hmm. So people wouldn't guess way ahead of time who did it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it all comes out of here.
Okay.
You eat mince pie and pickles and go to bed and dream. And
Okay. Okay. The next question is Rebecca.
When writing this book, did you know who the killer was going to be, or did you let the book kind of develop as you went along?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Okay. When you wrote the book, did you know who the killer was going to be, or did you let the book go along and the killer reveal himself or herself?
Actually, the killer did change.
Oh, really?
Midway, yes. I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be somebody other than the person it turned out to be, but that wasn't working.
Ah.
So this worked better. So I did change in midstream on this one. Usually I know who it is and stick with it, but this happens to be one in which I changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a good time to talk a little bit about your process. You mentioned that it didn't work to have the original killer that
Right.
you had. Do your books usually come out whole, or do they come out in pieces? How does that work for you?
I start with the beginning, and I think I know the ending. And as I figure out how to get there as I go along. Some people outline. I can't stand to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm too lazy to outline. But I just let things develop as I go along, and sometimes characters will do something that I had no idea that they were going to do, or a character will pop up that I think, where'd she come from? It's a process that's very, very hard to explain. Mm-hmm. It was like when I was on the editorial page, my boss said, we have a very easy job, but very few people can do it.
Mm-hmm. And that was?
Writing editorials.
Writing editorials,
Yeah.
but maybe offending some people.
That we didn't mind at all.
Yeah, that was different from the boss that
That
came
was-
in and didn't want to
That's exactly
ruffle
right.
anybody's
Didn't want to
feathers.
ruffle anybody's feathers, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Let's go to June.
Did you,
Put it in front of your mouth.
why did you decide to weave three suspenses? You had three themes, different suspenseful things going to happen. Why did you decide to weave them all in rather than just have the murder?
I try to do something like that in all my books because life is not simple. You know, how many of us at any one time have only one problem or one thing that we can concentrate on completely? So by bringing in some other problems, the characters become more real, and the life of the book becomes more real, rather than having someone just bearing through and bearing down on one thing all the time. Give them some other troubles to deal with at the same time, which is what happens in real life. And so I try to do that every time I can.
Very interesting. Mitch and Al are main characters for this book, Murder on the St. Croix.
Yes.
And I take it they are mainstays in the other Mitch Mitchell books?
All the way through.
All the way through. Are the books written in such a way that you can read them independently, or do they need to be read in sequence?
They can be read independently because I give a little background. After you get into the book a little ways, I give a little background on what's gone on before, who Martha Todd is, and what Al has for a family, and things like that. So you can pick them up. But I certainly advocate reading them and buying all of them and reading them in order.
Okay, that's wonderful. And you talked about, is there something that I haven't asked that you'd like to talk about with relationship to your book? What can you tell us about other characters that are supporting characters? Do
Okay.
any of those recur?
Yeah, Mitch meets Martha Todd in the very first book.
Mm-hmm.
See, Mitch was married and had a wife and little baby, and they were killed in a car crash. So that was before the first book. The first book starts with him dating a woman and falling in love with her and getting ready to propose to her, and then finding her in bed with another guy. So that kind of ends that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But then Martha Todd moves into the same apartment building that he lives in on Grand Avenue in St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Great
meets,
place
he
to live,
meet-
by the way.
Yes. He meets her there, and at near the end of the first book.
Mm-hmm.
And so she becomes, as they go through, she has a background too of a bad marriage where her husband beat her up and dragged her by her hair, so she shaved her head. They both have commitment problems all the way through.
Okay, that gives me some understanding of their relationship in Murder on the St. Croix.
Yes. Yeah, she's about to be moved out of town on Murder
Yes.
on the St. Croix, and he's going crazy how to keep her there.
Right. One of the people in the audience talked about Fargo. Was that you, Bernadine?
Yeah.
Want to hand the mic back?
I was just interested, Fargo played a pretty big part in your book. It was almost like a character, because they kept talking about going to Fargo. And some of the things, the references to Fargo, I was just curious if you ever spent any time in Fargo, because I have.
As,
so I was
as little as possible. I have been in Fargo, yes. It's, I wouldn't want to live there. It's not a bad place, but I wouldn't want to live there. And Mitch didn't either. So, I picked Fargo because it was just far enough away that it would be very, very difficult for them to keep up the relationship if she was that far away. I mean, they couldn't see each other on a very regular basis, or it would be a lot of travel, especially him having a job where he doesn't necessarily have 2 days in a row off. So to go out for a weekend would only happen about every 5 or 6 weeks, because he gets off every Sunday and he has this other off day rotates. So he gets every 6 weeks he gets a Saturday, Sunday, Monday off together. Other than that, he's only got 1 day off. So you're not going to go to Fargo and back on a work day.
No. Do we have any other questions from the audience that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I thought some of the names of your characters were unusual, familiar sounding. How do you select names for some of the supporting characters?
How I select names? Some of them are fairly close to real people that I worked with. The city editor, for instance, Don O'Rourke in real life is Don O'Grady, and a couple of the photographers' names are quite similar, and some of the names I pick out of the sky. My main characters' names, by the way, I have 4 sons: Warren, Mitchell, Alan, and Jeffrey. My characters are Warren, Mitchell, and Alan Jeffrey.
Oh, that's interesting.
Martha just came out of nowhere. Al's wife, Carol, is a blonde woman named Carol who I know. And the other side characters are just, they're similar to people I've known in life, but not quite right. And I had one of the characters in, which book? The Fair, the one at the State Fair, is named after a woman who asked me to name a character after her in one of my books.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting
Yeah.
thing to happen.
Yes.
Come up to you and
I've had that.
nice to meet you, sir.
Yeah. Well, she's. I had a blood infection after a surgery, and I had 16 days of therapy, very high potent antibiotics, and this woman was one of the people who took care of me during the therapy. So she didn't just come off the street. She just
Okay, so it was a little more intense than that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
I was wondering, when you're writing a book, do you spend time researching the location? You mentioned in this book the area of the St. Croix is an area you knew well, but in some of the books, do you take time to study or research the areas in which you're writing?
Oh, absolutely. My next book, which takes place up at Gull Lake in Brainerd at a resort, I went up there the year before I wrote it, and it was off season, and I wanted to check out, basically I wanted to check out Maddens, which in the book turns into madrigals. And I was walking, and they were closed for the season, and this guard came up after I'd been walking around there for a while and asked if he could help me. And I told him why I was there, and he called the owner of Madden's and asked if he could let me in and show me around the inside, and sure enough, he did. And he walked me through the thing, and if you read this next book, it's basically Madden's, only with the name changed. For the Winter Carnival book, I once rode with the Vulcan crew, so I knew all about that. It was a 20 below zero day when I rode with the Vulcan crew, and I checked out the hotel where where one of the scenes takes place, the big fancy room on the 23rd floor. You could do a lot of things online too. I went into the hotel website and got pictures of the rooms with the whirlpool bath and everything. And so, and I did the same thing at Murder on the St. Croix, where they go to the Lowell Inn. I checked out the Lowell Inn online. They had pictures of the rooms and everything like that. So you can do a lot online, or you go to the place. Like I say, I lived in Afton, and the book is. If you go to Afton, you can see the marina. If you go to St. Mary's Point, you can walk down to the beach where the guy disappears. So.
Mm-hmm. How many Mitch Mitchell books are there? We'll be talking about your new one in just a few minutes, but there's Murder on the St. Croix, but how many other books are there?
The one we're going to be talking about next is number 11.
Okay.
Number 12 is almost ready to go to the publisher.
Oh my goodness. So,
yes.
So Mitch has a long life ahead of him.
Yeah, we hope so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, I'm down to finished with the first draft and ready to go through it, and clean it up, and send it on.
So you write in drafts of.
I'll write a first draft, and I've sort of patterned my work process after Robert B. Parker, who I heard talk a couple times, and he said he does 5 pages a day, or did 5 pages a day. He's gone to that great library in the sky. But he'd do 5 pages a day. Rather than saying, I'm going to sit down for 2 or 3 hours or 4 or 5 hours, you might sit there and sharpen pencils, look out the window, and have nothing to show for those hours. If you can't get your butt out of the chair until you've done 5 pages, you're going to get 5 pages done. And then if you're rolling good, you go a little more. So that's the way I go. And then when I get done with that, I'll go back and read over it and make some minor just changes, or maybe throw the whole thing out. But, and then the next day when I start, I read through the previous day's work and maybe fiddle with it some more, or maybe not, and so that I know where I'm picking up. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I go.
Having that previous day's work as kind of fodder for the coming day.
Yes. The computer is a wonderful thing for writers.
Cut, paste.
Cut, paste, go through, yeah. I know some people still use the old typewriters, some of the old timers, but boy, I'm so glad to have that computer there to work, where I can make the changes just with a few keystrokes.
Right.
Yeah, rather than ripping up. When I started newspaper work at the St. Paul Dispatch, we were still on course on the old Underwoods, and we made 3 carbon copies of everything.
I remember
you had
that.
to really hammer that sucker to get through to the last copy. One went to the city desk, one went to the copy desk, one went somewhere else, I don't remember where, and you kept the last copy. But it's so much easier with the computer.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. June, go right ahead.
How soon after you left the paper did the paper close?
How soon what?
Didn't you work for the St. Paul Dispatch?
Yes.
Didn't it close? Shut down?
No, it's still going. It's much, much smaller.
Oh, I'm thinking the other St. Paul
Oh, the
paper.
Dispatch, there's no Dispatch anymore. It's just the morning paper, the Pioneer Press. They closed down the...
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and they moved the office to another building and tore down the building I worked in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How soon was that after you left?
Oh, it was right about, it was already in the plans when I left. So it was right after, within a year at the time that I left.
that was the time when newspapers were either merging or
Yeah.
or dying right and left.
Yeah, well, yeah, they were starting to.
Mm-hmm.
I know the paper that I went to out in Massachusetts sort of hit a peak in 1988. I went out there in 83,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a booming operation yet, and it was still, and it kept growing, and it hit a peak in '89 and then everything crashed.
Mm-hmm.
And they laid off about, they had expanded, they'd moved the advertising department out to another building, and all of a sudden they started laying off people, and everything was back in one building, and the paper got smaller. The same thing happened with the Pioneer Press.
Right, and that's what was happening in the book.
Yeah, yes, yeah. They were threatening layoffs in this book, that's right. One of the subplots.
Yes, yes. Let's see. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
You've written 11, going on 12 books now. How do you keep track of the events so that you don't have inconsistencies down the line? Do you have a notebook someplace or a file?
I have a card file of every book with all the characters and a little description of each character and their ages and what they look like, what kind of car they drive, things like that. And another thing that I do is I write the books every day. At the end, I have a legal pad, and I jot down notes of what happened in that chapter or what happened that day, so I can go back and look and see which page is that on, and I can look it up on the computer. So you have to, otherwise things could get out of hand. I've had, while reading through a first draft, I've had a car change color from blue to gold, things like that. Actually, names change.
Could come back to bite you.
Yeah, right. That's why you go through it 2 or 3, 4 times before you send it to the publisher.
Yes, and that's why God made editors.
That's right. And even the editor will miss things when you get your page proofs back, and there's still corrections to be made.
Yes. Any more questions from the audience? Maria?
I was wondering if there's a favorite mystery writer that you yourself like to read.
If what?
Favorite, do you have a favorite
reader?
Favorite mystery
writer?
Oh, that would be Elmore Leonard. And
I'm not acquainted with him.
Elmore Leonard has written, he just died last year. He's written probably 50.
Oh my
books.
goodness.
He never did a series. He just all standalones. He was based in Detroit, but he also wrote from Florida, and he is an absolute master of dialogue. It's what everybody looks to for dialogue. He's considered the king of dialogue, and his characters are just out of this world.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. But he won't be writing anymore.
So you have to
I have to
you have to go back and.
A lot of my favorite authors are dead. Mark Twain is gone.
Yeah, he's been gone for a long time.
He didn't write mysteries, but I loved Mark Twain.
Any other authors that?
Yeah, there's currently Michael Connelly I like. I was a big fan of P.G. Wodehouse. And there are a few that I pick up regularly and look at. Some are a little off the wall, actually.
But that's fun.
Yes.
That's fun to have off the wall authors.
Yeah.
Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well,
And
thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
it's really enlightening to hear about your process and to hear about your characters. We'll be coming back shortly to discuss with Glenn his new book, Fishing for a Killer. I'm Sue Ellen, and I'm from Maple Grove.
Hey, did you know as a resident of Maple Grove, you have an all-access pass to Northwest Community Television? You can produce your own show or help other residents create theirs.
I've decided to produce BookBeat because I love books and I like learning about authors and learning about book clubs, and it's just really fun.
Ready to produce your own show? Visit nwct.org. Get your all-access pass today.
I'm trying something new today. I've got my questions on my phone. Good afternoon and welcome to BookBeat. Reading books is the key to an enlightened society. You want a key light back there, right?
I'm just gonna borrow this.
I think we're about ready, aren't we, Jesse? Good. BookBeat is a show about books and book readers.
A very odd combination of topics.
We interview book club members. How are your books chosen? And film their discussions.
Trying to find happiness and love in her life.
We also provide tips for forming book clubs
I think you just have to find a group of interested book readers.
and books that are current that might be enjoyable to read. In a society where everything is instantaneous, we're losing that sense of depth that reading can bring that other media doesn't. My name is Sue Ellen Zagrabelny.
Well, I can't guarantee Oprah, but I can guarantee Channel 20.
Look for BookBeat Sundays at 5 p.m., repeated Monday at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. on Channel 20. See you then. Welcome back to BookBeat. I'm Sue Ellen Zagrabelny, your host, and our guest is Glenn Ickler, author of Fishing for a Killer. And welcome back, Glenn.
Thank you.
This is your newest book, correct?
That's correct. Ink is barely dry on that copy.
Wonderful. What inspired you to write this particular Mitch Mitchell mystery?
I worked for the newspaper at St. Paul Dispatch for 20-some years. And one of the things that happened every year was the governor's fishing opener. And I always heard tales from things that went on at the governor's fishing opener. And I thought, you know, as I was searching for a topic for the next book, that would be a good place for a crime, for somebody to disappear, someone. So I started off with the disappearance. We start with a boat, an empty boat, going around in the bay in front of the resort where the action takes place. Mm-hmm. It seemed like an ideal thing, and it worked out pretty good.
Yes, and your main characters, Mitch and Al,
Yes.
show up again.
They do.
And tell us again who these people are.
Well, Mitch and Al work for the St. Paul Daily Dispatch. Mitch is a reporter. He believes that he's the best reporter on the staff. And Al is a photographer, and the two have been buddies since they went to the University of Minnesota together. And they went into the Navy together, and then when they came out of the Navy, they went into newspapers and wound up working together at the Dispatch. And they often go on assignments together. In fact, their boss refers to them as the Siamese twins. So he says they're joined together at the funny bone, which is the skull in their case. So, and they've been through, well, this is the 11th book. They've been through 11 adventures now, and sometimes barely survived.
Where, you mentioned a little earlier that you did some research to prepare for this book.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, didn't want to use the real name of a resort, but I wanted to get a feel for a real resort. So I drove up to Brainerd to Gull Lake to Madden's Resort, which unfortunately was closed for the season. And as I'm wandering around there looking at the outside of it and wondering what the inside looks like, a guy in a Madden's jacket walks up to me and says, "Can I help you with something?" And I explained what my mission was. And he got on the phone and called the owner of the resort and got permission to open it up and let me in and walk through the whole place and get a feel for it. And I jotted down some notes, and so if you read the book and read about madrigals, and if you've ever been to Madden's, you'll recognize a lot of things. So it was very nice of them to let me do that, I thought.
All right, yes. You mentioned Martha Todd, Mitch's love interest.
Yes.
How are they getting along these days?
In this book?
In this book, generally.
Well, they're getting along very well because they've got a wedding date set.
Ooh.
That's one of the big problems in this book. Mitch, the fishing opener that Mitch and Al are sent up to cover is the weekend before he's supposed to be married the following Saturday. So, it looks nothing to it. They're up there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He'll be back on Monday, no problem. There's plenty of time for the wedding. He's got his tux he has to get fitted and all that stuff, but there's plenty of time. Only when they find that the governor's press secretary is murdered, then they have to stay for a couple days to cover that story. Well, then, as things are going along, a young woman who disappears. So there's a couple more days, and things, the days dwindle down to a precious few. And the question is he going to get back in time for the wedding?
Well, it sounds exciting.
Yes.
Sounds like it's going to be a little bit of a cliffhanger.
And Martha is back there in St. Paul, and they're talking on the phone every day, and she's going crazy to get him back, and he's going crazy to get back. And the city editor keeps saying, "No, you have to stay. We'll do our best to get you back by Saturday, but you have to stay and cover the story as long as you can." So.
Oh dear. Where this book wasn't it wasn't a real life crime that happened, but it's a real life event.
It's a real life event. It happens every year. It started in the 60s with Governor Rolvog.
Holy Rolvog, yes.
And it was basically a weekend drunk.
Okay.
Rolvog was noted for
a little tip.
And then when we got some more conservative governors, it tamed down a little, but it's still a pretty good party. And it's covered every year by all the media, of course. I never had the misfortune of being sent up to cover it, but a lot of my friends got the job occasionally. There was one thing that I wanted to work into the book, and I never could figure out how to get it in there.
And that was?
These two guys from the Dispatch. One was the managing editor, and one was the Capitol reporter. They were up there covering the governor's fishing opener, and in an adjoining town, there was a rice festival, and things were getting boring at the opener, so they went to the rice festival and had a few drinks, and they're driving back, and the reporter is driving, the managing editor is sitting in the right-hand seat with a cocktail in his hand.
Oh dear.
And the blue light goes on behind them.
Oh dear.
So the managing editor decides to throw the drink out the window. Only he doesn't open the window first.
Oh, heavens.
He breaks his thumb.
That would have been a fun story.
And the cop walks up to the window, and the first thing he gets is this full alcohol smell. And they managed to persuade the cop that, we're with the governor's party. And after some conversation, he says, "Stay right behind me." And he leads them back to and they got off.
That would have been a fun
I
story.
wish I could have gotten that in, but I couldn't find a way to work it in.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah.
Too bad. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about fishing for a killer?
Well, it was fun to work the timing thing, to try to stretch out the days so that it was coming down to the 11th hour for getting back for the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
I had to work to get it to stretch out, because otherwise it could have been solved a lot sooner if certain people hadn't run away and certain people hadn't been kidnapped and certain people
dear.
hadn't climbed a silo.
Something to look forward to read.
I hope so.
For
Yeah.
our audience, for
Yes.
sure. Thank you very much, Glenn, for joining us today on BookBeat. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Let's do this again, and I'll. Go straight? Okay. Thank you, Glenn, for joining us at BookBeat today. We look forward to seeing you next time on BookBeat.
Well,
The one with the light on, yeah, I know. I'm just being not responsive today.
You look really good in this shot.
Glenn, thank you for joining us at BookBeat today. We look forward to you. Put your teeth in, Sue Ellen. Glenn, thank you for joining us on BookBeat today. We look forward to you joining us next time on BookBeat. We'll see you then.
well, I hope so. Thank you. It's been
Thank
fun
you.
being here.
Thank you for joining us. Oh, that's good.
You're at the crowd, right?
Yep. Give me a little footage to. So much.
Yes, thank you very much.